Welcome to Evolve by LinkedIn, a new virtual event series designed to enable you and your team to transform your business, your brand, and of course, yourselves as marketers. My name is Ty Heath. I'm global lead at LinkedIn's B2B Institute. The B2B Institute researches how to accelerate business to business relationships. We research how marketers can create more value with leading thinkers. You'll meet some of my colleagues in just a moment, but today we're going to be talking about how you can create value by investing in some big trends that are just going to increase in strength over the next decade. So before we dive into the content, let's first go through a few housekeeping items. So don't worry about taking all of the notes. We're going to provide a recording and some resources for you to dive into after the session. And we also want to hear from you. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Slido tool, and we're going to get to those questions at the end. And if you're following us on social, feel free to use the hashtag Evolve by LinkedIn. We're excited to hear from you. And then also at the end, we'll be doing a survey because we want to know how we can improve the event for the future. If you have any technical difficulties whatsoever, refreshing your screen often works. Definitely do that. So with that, let's also then talk about what we're going to be doing today. So first up, we're doing the welcome right now. Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. We'll then cover the 3 trends that you need to invest in for this next decade to be successful. And then we'll do some Q&A and then end with a few closing remarks. So now with that, let's get into some background on the content that'll help set you up for success. So let's get to the slides. So with trends, marketers are always asking, what's everyone else doing? But that's not the right question. The question we should be asking is, what is no one doing? The best and the most valuable ideas are contrarian ideas. And let me break that down, because we're not contrarian for the sake of being contrarian at the B2B Institute. So looking at this matrix here, you can see that you can be consensus with the crowd, contrarian against the crowd. You can also be wrong and right. So when you're wrong, there's no value there because you're wrong. And when you're consensus and right, there's also no value there because the value gets competed away. That's where everyone else is playing. Simply put, what you want to do is what no one else is doing and be right about it. When you're contrarian and right, you can actually take advantage of the entire opportunity. And that's what we've spent our time investing in. Over the past 5 years, we've written 30 different trends. You can find these on b2binstitute.org. So everything from science of brand to the score algorithm to blockbuster marketing to the death of hyper targeting. So we'll be going through the top trends today, but we've spent a considerable amount of time investing in this. Definitely check it out. And today, though, what we want to do is actually focus in on 3 trends that are the most durable and the most contrarian of all time that we have. And that's war on brand, blockbuster marketing, and the death of hyper targeting. So joining me on this journey of contrarianness are two colleagues who I deeply admire, work family, no doubt, John Lombardo and Peter Weinberg.
Great to see you, Ty. Good to be back with the family.
Always good to be back with the family. So you know what it is. You know what I'm going to say. We always like to do a fun question to have the audience get to know all of us a little bit better. I thought in honor of the topic, which is like things that last. Oh, welcome to New York. Sorry about the sirens. I'm in the heart of New York. But anyway, to celebrate the trends that are long lasting, I thought we could do the question, what is the best tech invention of the 21st century? What do we think is going to last? And by the way, audience, we want to hear from you. What is the best invention of the 21st century in your eyes? To give you two a little time to think, I'm going to go ahead and say online streaming, because here we are right now able to talk with all of you. It helps us keep in touch with our families. It keeps in touch with all of the different milestones happening in people's lives. Weddings and events are being hosted now. So shout out to online streaming. Now, John, what's your idea of the best tech invention?
I mean, my joke answer would be the stapler, but my truthful answer is electricity.
Electricity.
You really can't do anything with electricity.
Can't really do anything about that. And Peter, how about you?
Yeah, Ty, well, I believe you said 21st century, so I'm not sure electricity would qualify, John, and we're going to ask you to leave the broadcast now. But I'll try to make up for John's terrible answer. I think the best tech invention of the 21st century, in my opinion, is probably the Nintendo Switch. What an invention. You know, once upon a time, I used to travel on airplanes. I don't know if you guys remember that. And I can tell you, when you're on a 26-hour flight to Australia and you have a handheld video game console, I think that's really just the pinnacle of technological achievements in the 21st century. So
can't do any of that stuff without the electricity, just as a reminder.
Yeah, 20th century, just a reminder.
And I'm just saying, I'm not a person who chases the latest trend like you, Peter. I chase durable trends.
Family. So,
sorry.
Plenty entertaining for the folks sitting next to you on the flight. From the chat, we're seeing iPhone, Zoom, social media, online shopping, video chat, online communications, AI. So there's some ideas for us all to consider. So with that, also, I wanted to actually talk about one of the things that inspired us to create this content, and that's the thinking of Jeff Bezos. On the slide here, you know, what we're saying is that marketers are always asking what's changing. A better question is what won't change. What is it about Jeff, guys, that inspires us to invest in this content?
It is this core idea that you want to build a business strategy or a marketing strategy, not on what's going to change, but on what won't change. He always talks about, he goes and talks to like business school students. They always say, Jeff, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And he always says, you know, that's the wrong question. The right question is what is not going to change in the next 10 years, because you can build a business on what will not change. You really can't build a business on things that change all the time. So that would be the simple answer. And that's why, even though I was asked the question about 21st century, I still went with electricity, because I was contrarian and right across centuries.
I see what you did there. I see Peter nodding with respect to that answer too. So, all right. So with that, we will bring you two back later to cover trends. Let's get into our first trend now, which is called War on Brand. And this trend is about the balance between demand generation and brand advertising, sales activation, and long-term marketing. So let's talk about it. And so according to leading effectiveness thinkers in marketing, Binet and Field, there are two types of marketing: short-term marketing and long-term marketing. So short-term marketing looks like this. You can see it on the slide there. It increases sales, but the effects of it decay quickly, and it doesn't have lasting effect. So we know this type of marketing as lead generation and demand generation. But that's not actually an accurate description of what it does. These types of marketing, sales activation, doesn't create demand. It helps us capture latent demand. And that brings us to the other type of marketing. So long-term marketing, also known as brand building. So that also does increase sales. But the true value of long-term marketing and branding is in the impact it has on the future. So generating future impact and value. So you can see here on the chart, in the short term, sales activation dominates brand marketing. But if we pull out that time horizon to 6 months, you see a crossover. When it comes down to it, we actually need both types of marketing. We need short-term marketing and sales activation to maximize short-term sales. And we need long-term marketing and branding to maximize long-term sales. But who is waiting around to see the impact of brand? I'll tell you the answer. You can see it right here on the slide. Only 4% of B2B marketers are measuring beyond 6 months. Most of the budget is flowing to sales activation. So 95% of B2B campaigns are run on a CPC. And we think about it, trends indicate that brand is only going to become more important over time. So according to our research, we should be investing maybe about a 50-50 split with brand and demand, right? But here's the thing, over time, we can only see that branding is going to become more important. The reason is more of our customers and our potential customers are doing research online, but they're only researching the brands that they actually know. And so we can see that brand is creating value that activation can't. In both cases here, we can see that it does drive short-term sales, but there are a number of under-discussed benefits that we should be talking about in the industry. So long-term sales, pricing power, talent acquisition, and more. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each of these. You can find them at b2binstitute.org, but I do want to touch on a few areas to invest. So getting into the first benefit here, it's the value and how it improves activation performance. So this is a real example from a LinkedIn customer that did advertising with us. And what this graph shows is that when you blend the approach, it increases the impact. So they ran a campaign, this acquisition only, and they were able to generate 0.2% conversion. But when they married the approach, when they married brand and demand, they're able to 6x the impact, driving 1.2% conversion. So we definitely want to invest there because when you have a big budget, you can only imagine the impact there. So that's very valuable. Next up is the value to long-term sales and the impact on future cash flows. So we're all marketers here. I know you know what this is. It's the most recognized mental model in all of marketing, the funnel. So you've got the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel. And what we like to do at B2B Institute is actually take this funnel and turn it on its side. So now what we're looking at here is growth over time. And let's pretend we're all in the space of cloud computing. So we're marketing a cloud computing product. As you can imagine, in the short term, there are only a number of customers in the market for cloud computing services. So maybe about 20 accounts. So we call these in-market buyers. But if we expand that time horizon out, maybe there's a larger number of accounts, maybe 200 accounts in the market for our services. So we call this out-of-market buyers. So you can see here illustrated why it makes sense to invest for the long term, because we need to reach both in-market and out-of-market buyers. By the way, this is an excellent conversation to have with your finance team and your CFO to build the case, because as you can see, the in-market buyers help us to generate current cash flow, whereas long-term investment with branding helps us generate that future cash flow. Next up is pricing power. So as you can imagine, strong brands can raise prices. So looking at change and profitability on this slide, the different levers that we can pull to be able to increase profitability. So all things being equal, when we can increase our price, that tends to be the strongest impact on our profitability. So sales volume, fixed costs, and variable costs, all things being equal, increasing the price helps us the most. To grow your business, you can either increase sales, get new customers, but increasing your price is the thing that will help benefit the most. So with that, I want to turn it over to John, who's going to take us to our second trend, blockbuster marketing. Hey, John.
Ty, great to see you. I'm in the show. Wonderful to be here.
You're in the show. All right, my friend, take it away.
Wonderful. Yeah. So we're going to talk about the second durable contrarian trend, blockbuster marketing. Now, there's for a long time been essentially ideas around or recommendations from folks saying you should think like a publisher. This is the way that you should operate your marketing department. You need to be putting out small, real-time content all the time. The problem is, I don't actually think that that's right. And I think that's largely borne out by the fact that the newspaper industry has not been a highly valuable industry for a long time now. So why should companies adopt that model? In fact, they shouldn't. They should look to a much more profitable model, one that comes from Disney. You really shouldn't think like a publisher. It shouldn't be small real-time content. You should think like Disney and do big timeless content. And it's really borne out, of course, in the stock price and the economic performance of Walt Disney Company, which has gotten more and more valuable, and with Disney Plus is likely to get even more valuable. So Disney's the best at monetizing creativity. You should study what they do, which is now what we are going to do. There's 4 key creative principles that have made Disney successful. One is they make big bets, not small bets. One is not that they do old content, not new content. We call that surprising familiarity. One is that their creative doesn't change much over time. Too many marketers want to change their creative. Disney creative is very consistent distinctiveness we talk about here. And then finally, there is this concept that Disney is just doing one big thing a year and then they're merchandising it in different formats and different channels, but they really have an extreme focus on what's called total merchandising. So let's go through the creative principles. So number 1, in digital marketing especially, people are obsessed with test and learn. They think that doing big things is risky, but in fact, doing small things is much riskier. Mostly because small bets, small campaigns, test and learn, it never breaks through. So let's take an example from actually Warner Brothers. There's a wonderful book called Blockbusters, written by a Harvard professor named Anita Elbersay. I encourage you to read it. And she looks at production budgets for Warner Brothers in the early 2000s. And she just looks at the size of the production budget, which is what you see here on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, how much money those bets made. And you can see that, in fact, when they made a small budget film, and you can see some of them here, they only got $1 back for every dollar that they put in. And so there's not a great return there. So the small bet seems like it's the smart approach, but it's actually not, because when you compare it to the big bets, and these are things like the Harry Potters and the Dark Knights of the world, Warner Brothers found that though the initial investment was much bigger, and it felt like because of that, it was riskier. In fact, the return was much greater. For every dollar they invested here, they got $6 back. So this is the kind of idea that you can pursue in your marketing strategies. I see that somebody's asking for SEO. Its reality is like a big piece of content is likely to rank higher in SEO than not. So the small stuff tends to not be able to break through, whereas the big stuff tends to break through. And that's true whether we're talking about SEO and what ranks high in search. And it's also true in the world of movies, in the world of music. Big things break through, small things don't break through. In the world of B2B marketing, which we care a lot about, something like this is a great example. Salesforce does these state of reports. So they've got the state of marketing, the state of sales, the state of CRM, the state of customer service. Each big part of Salesforce's business has a state of report, which they do every single year. You can see this says 2015. So, obviously they're doing them in 2016, 2017, 2018. We'll come back to this, but adopt the Disney strategy as Salesforce has: make big bets, don't make small bets. The second concept, called surprising familiarity. There is just an absolute love for everything new in the world of marketing, when in fact the most profitable ideas are older ideas. So if you look at the top 10 grossing films of all time, you'll find that it is a series of sequels and prequels, but it is essentially taking old IP, old intellectual property, and continuing to market it. So you can see things like Fast and Furious 7, Frozen 2. Of course, there's many Lion Kings, many Jurassic Parks. And then there's all of the Marvel and Pixar stuff like Toy Story 4 and, the Avengers Infinity War. So the strategy is actually to develop a great piece of IP and then to market it every single year, kind of like you saw in the last Salesforce example. That is the way that you monetize. And in fact, that is why Hollywood is continuing to make more and more sequels and prequels, because they recognize that's how you monetize. Now, this is how it plays out in the world of B2B. As I mentioned earlier, Salesforce is the state of sales. They did it in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Every year they get a little bit more brand awareness, a little bit more brand equity. When they first started making these, they were a cost center, so they didn't make the company money. Now they generate Salesforce north of 20, 30, $40 million a year. So this is how you invest in one single idea, refresh it every year, and then grow it over time. Consistent distinctiveness is the third principle. It's really critical that your brand identity, your marketing identity look like no other company. So you can see a Pixar film at this point or a Marvel film and know based on the look, the feel, even the music, that it is a Marvel film or a Pixar film. Disney does this with incredible ability. They really have developed this very distinct creative palette, and it really works very well in their marketing. And another example here, to put it in very tangible terms, if you look at Salesforce and their campaign now, they've got this Trailblazer campaign they've been running for a couple of years. It's got this character Astro at the heart of it. Astro is a raccoon hybrid human, a raccoon-human hybrid that wears this very clear shirt that is obviously Salesforce because it has the cloud on it. And the character brings together companies and customers or government and citizens, but it's a very distinctive look and feel with this specific character and the Salesforce logo. And if you go look at any of their stuff on TV or even their latest annual report, you'll see it's always designed in this Trailblazer style with the raccoon character and kind of an animated style. So Salesforce is doing this exceptionally well. Geico does this with the gecko. So a really wonderful concept for being consistently distinctive, looking like Salesforce and only like Salesforce. The fourth and final concept is called total merchandising. And if you think about what Star Wars has done here, Star Wars, of course, owned by Disney, they're taking something like the X-Wing and they're making a video game with the X-Wing, they're making a drone, they're making a Lego set, but it's one core piece of IP, just marketed in different formats or on different channels. So if you look at how, of course, this plays out broadly with Disney, but specifically with Star Wars, Star Wars makes more money from merchandising, total merchandising, than they do from the films themselves. So you can see they make half of their money from toys and a lot of money from video games and, of course, from the movies and the DVDs and the books. But it's just taking the core IP, so the characters generally, or the X-Wing, you can almost even think of like a character, and just putting that same IP in different formats. So this is a wonderful example for how Disney does it. And absolutely, one of the questions I'm seeing here is, B2B marketers, should we be looking at how B2C brands differentiate or build distinctiveness? And absolutely, there's a lot to be learned. B2B doesn't take, I don't think, any of these concepts seriously enough, but they certainly don't take the design and distinctiveness concepts seriously enough. Wonderful animation here. Wow, the X-Wing flies away. Oh, that's not an X-Wing, that's a Death Star, I think. But I'll let Peter clarify whether that was an X-Wing or a Death Star. And then the final bit here, internal merchandising. How might it play out in the world of B2B? Again, you can see Salesforce, they market Dreamforce in posters. They market them in airports. They market it on LinkedIn. They market it through reports. So it's the same one event marketed in different channels, or it's the same single report, state of sales, marketed in different channels, online and offline. But the key is you're not doing new creative. You're making a very big bet. You're making that big bet every single year. You are essentially making it look and feel like Salesforce. Then you're just taking that model and repeating it every single year with the core IP in different channels. So the channels change, even the ad format may change, but the core IP that goes into it, that never changes. And Disney is really wonderful at doing that. And one of the questions I'm seeing here is about the size of the budget. Frankly, though big companies do this, this strategy works best for small companies. If you're a small company, you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of money. And so it makes sense to focus on one thing. So go talk to 100 of your customers, get their insights, their questions, their comments, their verbatims, put those into a report, which you share with other customers. But you could very easily take the Salesforce strategy as a small company, talk to your customers, package up those insights, and then use that to develop a report and then share a different insight from that report every day on any of your marketing channels. Peter Weinberg Associates, are you there?
I am, yes. Sorry, Ty, I think you're saying something, but you're muted. The classic
muted while talking. But we need to clear something up. That was not an X-Wing.
I mean, Ty, we can't be on a team with this guy. I mean, it's humiliating. It's a Millennium Falcon. Jeez, it's the ship that did the Kessel run in 14 parsecs. Oh my God, so embarrassing, John.
Was it 14 parsecs?
It might have been 11 parsecs. Now I'm going to get myself in trouble. It was somewhere between 10 and 14 parsecs. I'm
sure we have some Star Wars aficionados on here that can help us out. But Millennium Falcon, come on. So let's answer one question before we turn it over to Peter to take us to the last trend. So I know you covered a few of the questions, John, but one of the questions was, what is an example of timeless content? So I know you touched on it a little bit, but maybe you can expand by saying, like, what are the elements or what are things that make content timeless?
Yeah, well, it's got to, people tend to try to understand, for example, when they talk to their customers, they want to personalize. So like, what do I do for every different customer? But the reality is, don't think about what's different about your customers, think about what's the same. So if you talk to 100 customers and 50 of them say the same thing, that's clearly an important concept. And if that concept holds true in year 1 and then year 2 and then year 3, you can see that's a durable concept. And those durable concepts are generally something you want to actually bake into the content production and maybe into the surveys that you run every year. So a lot of these insights, they come from your customers. Understand what all customers have in common and how many years in a row they have that in common. That's a nice way to find a durable concept.
Absolutely. Great. Well, Peter, do you want to take us home with this last trend and then we'll all come back and chat?
Sure, I would love to.
Okay. All right. Over to you.
The Death Star. I mean, did it look like a Death Star? It's just, it's going to be hard for me to move past that, but I'm just going to try. I'm just going to be the bigger person. And enough about correcting John's mistakes. Let's talk about correcting the biggest marketing mistake of the past decade, which is hyper-targeting. So over the past 10 years, we have really become obsessed with hyper-targeting. In B2B, that means we want to reach the CXO at the pharmaceutical company with 10,000 employees in Minneapolis. In B2C, it's, we want to reach left-handed ventriloquists in Tasmania or whatever. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to discover the joys and benefits of broader targeting. And that means something different in B2B versus B2C. I think it helps to think about targeting as a spectrum. Over the next 10 years, what I think you'll see is targeting is just going to become much less important in B2C. I don't think it ever was particularly important. Most big B2C brands were built through mass media, essentially untargeted media. There's no reason to think that doesn't work today. But B2B is different. You actually do need some level of targeting in B2B, but you don't need hyper-targeting. You need what we call category targeting, which is something I'll talk about in just a minute. But what's wrong with hyper-targeting? Well, let me attempt to make the case to you, the case against hyper-targeting. When I was a kid, my mom told me, Peter, when you grow up, you can be anything you want to be as long as you're not a lawyer. So I have to first apologize to my mom for channeling my inner lawyer here. And I'm going to try to make a tight legal argument against hyper-targeting, a 5-pronged argument to you, the jury. Hopefully you'll find hyper-targeting guilty on some or all of these charges. But let's start with the central argument. There's kind of a thread running through the argument, which is the idea that hyper-targeting is based on a series of assumptions. And assumptions can be very dangerous. This is a fascinating thought experiment here. Let's say you make a decision based on 3 assumptions or 3 variables, and each one of those assumptions has a 99% chance of being correct. Well, then you have a 3% chance of being wrong, which is pretty good. Now let's say you make another decision, but this one's actually based on 30 assumptions, which also have a 99% chance of being right. Well, now you have a 27% chance of being wrong. So the takeaway is pretty simple here. The more assumptions you make, the more likely you are to be wrong. So let's talk about some of the assumptions behind hyper-targeting. The first assumption is the idea that we have really good, accurate, reliable data that can power all of our hyper-targeting efforts across the internet. And unfortunately, this is a very unsafe assumption. Most data is not good data, it's bad data. And I'm talking particularly here about third-party data, which is what powers most programmatic targeting on the internet. Here's a recent academic study from MIT, the Melbourne Business School, and Group M. And all the researchers did is they tested the accuracy of third-party targeting data. And the findings were kind of hilarious. I found them hilarious. I think most marketers wouldn't find them hilarious, which is that gender, for instance, gender targeting is accurate 50% of the time. In other words, about as good as flipping a coin. Age targeting is wrong 75% of the time, and it generally gets worse after that, depending on how niche you go. You can actually find this out for yourself. It's a secret hiding in plain sight. You can ask the internet who it thinks you are based on your browsing behavior. I've done it a few times, according to the internet, based on the sites I visit. I live in both West Virginia and Florida, which is a very long commute. I'm also married and single. I hope the internet doesn't tell my wife that. She's going to be very upset. Not true, by the way. So the point is, all of this data, it's not good data, it's bad data. And if you use it to power your hyper-targeting, you're not actually reaching the hyper-targets that you thought you were. Assuming that someone is a CIO because they read the technology section of the Wall Street Journal is just not a safe assumption. But listen, not all data is bad data. There's some good data. This is going to sound extremely self-serving, but I'm going to say it anyway. LinkedIn has very accurate first-party data. So why can't you use LinkedIn data to hyper-target CXOs? Well, for a few reasons. First of all, you're not targeting individuals, you're targeting a network, right? We've all learned this over the past few years. It's not an individual that makes a buying decision in a B2B context. It's a whole group of people. You can't do anything in corporate America without getting 100 people to rubber stamp the decision, right? So you need to influence that entire network. Most of us have learned that, but I think we've forgotten another unsafe assumption, which is the assumption that this buying committee or this network is stable and unchanging. And that's not true at all because, and this is going to sound pretty obvious, people change jobs. So new people are constantly coming in and out of that network all the time. There's an enormous amount of churn or turnover in jobs. We have very good data on this at LinkedIn. And what we see is that every 4 years, about 40% of people change their jobs, their industry, their company size. So, if we go back here, let's say you're trying to target, the marketing director, an IT decision maker, and a CFO. Okay, but what if those people suddenly leave the company and they get replaced by people who were previously in a different job, right? The senior IT person was once a junior IT person. The marketing director used to work at an agency. The CFO used to be in-house at a bank, right? So the point is you need to actually cast a broad net to account for all of this change because you need to reach the current network and the future network. And you hit a moving target by casting a wide net, right? So that's assumption number 2. Let's talk about assumption number 3, which is the assumption that the only audience that really matters for a business is buyers or customers. And I actually think that's a bit cray-cray, if you ask me, because there's a lot of different audiences that add value to a business that aren't, a narrow list of 3 accounts. What about employees? What about your talent? What about potential hires? What about potential partners? What about potential investors or regulators? What about the media? These are all important stakeholders for a business. The types of people that influence your business results is broad, which means you need to cast, again, a wide net. You need broad targeting. Now let's talk about the fourth assumption, which is that marketers assume they are very good at predicting the future. So we know we don't need to target these 1,000 accounts. We're just going to target these 3 accounts that we know are going to buy from us and spend the most money. The truth is that optimizations always beat predictions. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that you are much better creating a broad target and then refining it over time based on performance data, as opposed to trying to guess in advance who's going to convert. It's like whittling a block of marble, which I know all of us do all the time. And we know as marble sculptors that you start with the big block and you chisel away at it. You don't tape together little pieces of marble. Here's a fun chart for you. This is a chart I saw early in my time at LinkedIn that I found very interesting. So what you have is performance here. You've got a credit card company trying to drive credit card acquisitions for business cards, and you can see the conversion rate over time. And what you see is that after a certain amount of time, all of a sudden performance goes like this. So what happens at that particular moment? Well, what happens is that the algorithms or the magical robots behind the scenes have enough data to start making refinements to the targeting. They start to figure out what's working and what's not working, and then they take over and you get hockey stick performance. For Terminator fans, this would be called Skynet. This is the Skynet moment when the robot gets enough intelligence to become autonomous. But there's an important wrinkle here, which is look at the target. The target was run of professional, which is what we call run of sites, essentially all the professionals on LinkedIn. Because the robot was given such latitude, it could take creative license and decide which audiences are actually converting. If you narrow in on an extremely hyper target to begin with, then you deprive the robot of that sort of optionality and you get much worse results. So instead of assuming that you know who's going to convert, why don't you just cast a broad net and let the robot decide who's going to convert? Let's talk about the final assumption. I think at the end of the day, most of us invest in hyper-targeting just because we think it saves us money. The idea is that you don't want to waste money reaching the wrong people. But if you actually do the math, and this is just some like dummy data, you should do the math for yourself. But I think what you'll find is that hyper-targeting does not actually create any efficiencies because generally speaking, it's more expensive to hyper-target. And the upfront increase in cost cancels out any of the downstream efficiencies. So here you can see 3 different approaches to targeting: hyper-targeting, broader targeting, and no targeting. As you can see, because of the upfront high cost of hyper-targeting, even with 0% waste, it still ends up actually being the most expensive approach here. But you don't want 100% wastage, right? There is a certain point at which you actually get too much wastage and it does start to become inefficient, especially in B2B. So like in the no targeting line item, if you've got 70% wastage, you're reaching 70% of the wrong people, then that's not going to be efficient either. But there is a kind of Goldilocks solution here, broad targeting or category targeting, where you have some waste, but it's an acceptable amount of waste, and the costs upfront are reasonable enough that you end up with the best possible CPA. So I think you should do the math for yourself. But I think what you'll often find is that the so-called efficiencies of hyper-targeting don't actually work out to be efficient when you run the numbers. But listen, I don't just want to tell you what not to do. I want to tell you what to do. So let's talk about this idea of category reach. I want to say this again. I think I said it before, but I can never say it enough times. I am not recommending that you target everyone. I don't think that's a good approach, at least for B2B. You just need to target anyone who could potentially buy from you. You need to target the category buyers. And this just looks very different in B2C versus B2B. In most B2C categories, anyone can buy the category. I used to have a brilliant client when I worked on the Colgate-Palmolive account, Mindell, and she told me, Peter, you know, our target is people with teeth. So I don't really need hyper-targeting. I just need to reach people with teeth. Targeting's not that important for Colgate. B2B, very different. Not everyone can buy IBM. Most people can't buy IBM or cloud computing. It's a very small subset of the general population. So reaching everyone would be hugely inefficient. But IBM still needs to reach everyone who could potentially buy from them now and in the future. You want 100% reach against category buyers. You don't want to reach the 5% that you think are going to spend with you. You want to reach everyone. There's 40 years of research behind this idea. And what the research says is that the biggest predictor of growth and sales and marketing effectiveness is not how targeted you are. It's how much reach you have against the category. This is one of the most important charts in marketing. Apologies if you've seen us present it 10,000 times before, but we just can't get enough of it. It's the share of voice, share of market chart. What it says in layman's terms is that in order to grow, you need to reach more customers than you currently have. Sounds pretty obvious, right? To put it in marketing terms, your share of voice needs to be bigger than your share of market. If your share of voice is higher than your share of market, you will grow. If it's lower than your share of market, you will shrink. And what you really want is extra share of voice, or ESOV, which is the difference between your market share and your share of voice. Now, how much growth you get back for a set amount of reach varies by category. Different categories respond differently to advertising. But our research with Les Binet and Peter Field has shown that in B2B, for every 10 points of extra share of voice, you get about 1% back in market share growth per year. This is very useful information, if we do say so ourselves, because what you can really do with this information is, first of all, figure out if your budget is sufficient to drive growth. And then you can also project how much growth you will actually get for a certain amount of reach. But the lesson of all of this is really quite simple. It's that reach, again, reach is what drives growth in B2B and B2C. Reach against the category. So hopefully I've prosecuted the case in a convincing way. The jury will have to decide, but I hope at least one of the 5 crimes will stick. And over the next 10 years, you'll see a move away from hyper-targeting and towards broader category targeting, which will look different in B2B and B2C, but the basic principle of reaching all buyers will hold true for both of them. And that's basically the show. I will just recap what you heard over the past 40 minutes in case you've already forgotten. I know we presented a lot of information, but these are our big predictions for the next 10 years, the big trends we expect to accelerate and see hold true. The first one we discussed, sorry, I lost my slide. Oh, now I got my slide. There we go. The future is not bottom of funnel lead generation. It's balance between brand and demand. And frankly, it's brand. Brand is going to be the biggest driver of growth and your ability to influence future buyers and get future cash flows from future buyers. What type of creative do you need to influence buyers? Well, forget about all these tiny little bets on real-time content and think about making big bets on repeatable franchises, the Disney model. And when it comes time to distribute your blockbuster franchises, don't go for hyper-targeting. If you want to be the leader in your category, then target the category targeting. And I think that's pretty much it. I guess we'll bring back the family for some Q&A. Hey, Ty. Hey, John.
Family.
Hey, family.
We're back.
Okay, we're back, and we've got a lot of questions. So let's try to get to as many questions as possible. And so, Peter, just continuing, because you were just talking about hyper-targeting, there were a few people who want to understand, how do I know if I'm actually hyper-targeting? Like, what are the signs of being overly targeted?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I would think about it in terms of layers. Like, how many layers of targeting are you stacking on top of each other? And once you get past beyond one layer, in my opinion, it generally starts to be excessive. I would always come back to this idea of category targeting and who can actually buy from you. So like, what's the one targeting facet that would really help you know that it's a category buyer? So if you're selling something only IT people buy, then you should target people who work in IT. And that is targeted. but it's not as targeted as senior people who work in IT at specific industries, right? So it's about bare minimum targeting versus maximum targeting, I think is one way to think about it.
Yeah. It seems that somebody knew where you were going with the Skynet reference as well. Somebody said, isn't targeting solvable by AI? So literally, they knew you were going to come in with the Skynet.
Maybe it was a robot who knew that I was going to do that.
They knew you were going.
Skynet has already happened. We all know Skynet is inevitable, obviously, those of us who have seen Terminator.
Yeah.
One thing, if I can just jump in, and Peter, you may want to talk about it a bit more, but somebody asked about, does broad targeting mean it's more expensive? And in fact, no. I mean, as Peter just described, if you just target everybody in IT versus targeting people in IT who are senior at certain companies, the more targeting, the more expensive. So just pick one broad target that's still targeted, as Peter said. That's actually going to be cheaper and likely to have a better economic impact for you.
Yeah. Are there any circumstances under which you would go narrow niche targeting? I think my take on this is, for example, looking at ABM, if you have the resources, right? If you work or you in a category where the businesses that you want to do business with, and you have a proven track record, that could make sense. But guys, are we saying, or are you saying no narrow targeting ever? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, Ty, you know us, we're extremists. So I got to just say the extreme thing, which is no hyper-targeting. The only time I would endorse hyper-targeting is if you're a small company that wants to stay small. If you want to sell to 3 accounts and be a company that only has 3 customers, you should target 3 accounts. If you want to be a company with lots of customers, then you need to target a giant list of accounts. So, I actually think account-based marketing can be a great tactic, but it just depends on what we mean. I don't think account-based marketing has to be hyper-targeted. I think it can be a big list of accounts, and oftentimes that's a good way to segment the market by accounts. But the idea that in advance the 3 accounts that are going to convert, and that you're going to make enough money targeting 3 accounts to make up for the 1,000 accounts you ignored, I just don't think the math adds up for a business of any size, to be perfectly honest with you.
Got it. So there's some nuance there, because we certainly need to balance the approach of sales activation and long-term branding. So I think it makes sense to think about what your goals are, how well you know your market. If you don't know your market, maybe start broadly and then zero in. Okay. Another question is about blogging. So people are talking about how blogs are used for search engine optimization. How does that factor into Blockbuster? Does it make sense to blog regularly to generate more links to building for your site?
Yeah, I will confess to not being an expert on SEO. I mean, in fact, Ty, you may want to jump in here as well, but I would say that you want to invest in a franchise like the examples we showed earlier from Salesforce. You want to, make sure that you talk to a bunch of customers, put their insights in there, talk to maybe some industry analysts, put their insights in there. Then you want to partner with them to market it, not just through your blog, but their blog. And so ultimately, like a big piece of content where you have multiple different partners or analysts or companies linking back to that piece of content, I would argue is likely to focus all of that link juice, all of that link strength on the single piece of content, and is likely to be a better performing and more durable search engine result for you over time.
Yeah, you claim not to know about it, but you're talking about link juice here, John. So.
Link juice, which is of course a technical term well known in the SEO community.
Yeah, I mean, but from a Blockbuster approach standpoint, I think it makes sense. Your blog posts, the content you create, should ladder up into your overall strategy for your franchise. So I think it does make sense to create content regularly, but just think about how that content builds into the Blockbuster strategy as you're building your SEO. So, okay, let's move on. There's a lot of questions coming through. Thank you so much for that. And we also have some poll results that where people want to invest. So it seems like most people are looking to invest in the hyper-targeting area. So pulling back, targeting more broadly, followed by maybe expanding brand advertising and Blockbuster marketing. So folks are definitely thinking about these, and glad to see it, because these are the trends that are going to grow in strength.
That's a good sign.
Yeah. Somebody asked a quick question. What is CPC? So really quick definition there. Sorry to use acronyms here. Cost per click. And the reference there was just to point out that a lot of money's flowing to sales activation where people are using cost per click as opposed to impressions that you might use if you're doing a brand strategy. So really quick definition there. Question for you guys. What are some examples of big bets that you're aware of? I know Trends, what we're doing today is an example of a big bet that we've made.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, Trends, we've done this now for 4 or 5 years in a row. Salesforce has done the state of sales for 4 or 5 years in a row. Mary Meeker's done the Internet Trends Report for 25 years in a row. Those are some great examples of franchises. So any sort of, let's call it, a franchise is just literally a topic you pick that you then every single year do net new research on and then talk about. So I would honestly encourage anybody who's looking to do this in the world of B2B, go download one of the state of reports from Salesforce and just reverse engineer it. Say, or download 2 different years and you'll say, okay, year 1 had 6 chapters, so did year 2. In each chapter, they have some opening paragraph, they have an interview with a customer, they have an interview with an analyst, they have some data points, 2 data points. And then you can literally just reverse engineer that and then understand how to build one yourself, where you then say, okay, I'm going to pick, I sell, ad tech. Okay, I'm going to have a state of ad tech report, and it's going to have 5 chapters, and it's going to have my intro, my interview 1, my interview 2, some data points, and maybe a case study, right? And then I just repeat that same structure for chapter 2, for chapter 3, for chapter 4, for chapter 5. And then that once you do it 1 year, you understand the next year how to do it better, and then year 3 even better, and 4. And so reverse engineer, build your own, and then literally keep on doing the same thing over and over and over is the way I would recommend thinking about it.
Yeah, I would just add, I think there's a financial argument here that's very important, which is just that our industry is obsessed with these adorable one-off PR stunts, like doing something at South by 1 year. And, that's what wins Cannes Lions, basically, what Peter Field has memorably called disposable creativity. And I think, Ty, to go back to your trend around the war on brand, you're trying to build a brand over the long term, over years and decades. So things that only create value at a very tiny moment in time, even if it works, if you can't do it again and again and again, it's not going to create that kind of compounding value. And if you actually look at Disney, one of the reasons they moved to this blockbuster strategy, if you actually read the financial statements about it, is just because it was a cost saving exercise. Because guess what? They don't have to spend as much money marketing Star Wars 9 as they would have had to spend marketing Star Wars 1. Once something has pre-existing equity, all the next franchises can borrow that equity, and there's a certain level of success kind of baked in. So especially for small companies, I would think about this as a way of just actually it's a cost reduction strategy of doing less content and instead focusing your efforts on one big thing that you can keep doing till the end of time.
You can actually the Salesforce thing. I think they literally, and I know Peter and I have developed one of these, a template where you're literally just dropping in image here, quotation here. I mean, you literally design a template in year 1 that you're using years 2, 3, 4, 5. So the production costs go way down, and then it actually frees up money to spend on media. I wouldn't encourage spending less money on media over time, and I don't actually think Disney does that. But I think you can and should find ways to be streamlined in your approach to production and then free up the money to reach your customers. Because at the end of the day, if you invest all this money in production and you never reach your customers with the media, it doesn't really move the needle, because you got to reach customers in order to move the needle. And, mostly media helps to do that.
Yeah, I want to stay on this for a second, because we did get a couple questions from folks saying, I am a small business owner, I don't have a ton of money to spend. What are some other ways, and I know we talk about this in All Weather Marketing, which you can check out on the b2binstitute.org website, but what are some other things on how people can save money, especially in today's market and what we're dealing with in the economy?
Yeah, I think that to John's point, I wouldn't try to save money on media. I think people are trying to pull back media spend for cost savings. And actually what the research says is that somewhat counterintuitively, the best time to invest in media is actually in a downturn, because advertising is a competitive sport. And when other people pull back and you pull in, you actually get a lot more bang for your buck. So that's not where I would look for cost saving. I would look in terms of efficiencies in really like two areas. I would produce less content. I know this is sort of the opposite of what you hear, but I think most companies have way too much content, not too little content. Like, unless 100% of buyers saw your old content, don't be developing new content. We all like to develop new creative because it's a fun part of the job, but it's just honestly not necessary, because you could, the Coca-Cola example, where Coca-Cola has been running the same ad in the UK for 23 years with no decline in performance. Another area I would look for efficiencies is in this sort of like media supply chain. I think a lot of money has been spent on the long tail of the internet, powered by this like junk third-party data. And I think companies like Procter & Gamble, Uber more recently, have found out that a lot of that stuff is cheap for a reason. It's because it's not that valuable. And actually, you're better off getting rid of those parts of your media plan and moving it to known publishers that you've heard of who have quality data and quality contexts.
Good, good, good. So I'm going to lump a couple questions together to try to squeeze in one or two more questions before we wrap up. We've got several questions here on targeting strategy. And so one element of it is there an experimentation process such that I can hone in on the right audience? How do I begin? And then at the same time, how do I then make sure that while I'm doing that, I'm reaching my message is reaching the audience and it's in front of decision makers? So if we could just speak really quickly to the optimization strategy. I know one of the things we touched on in the presentation is let the tool do the work. Let AI support you in getting to those audiences. But what else do we want to add in terms of that experimentation process?
I would say you should handle this, Peter, since this is more core to the idea you talked about.
Okay, John, pass the buck. I understand. Yeah, I think, again, start by just understanding who buys the category. And I think actually LinkedIn, in my opinion, is underused as a segmentation tool. So like if in our case, our audience is B2B marketers. So I would literally go into the LinkedIn ad tool and figure out how many B2B marketers there are in the world. And let's say that number is 10 million. I would think about, okay, what's my strategy to ideally reach 100% of that audience over the next few years? And then every single month or quarter, I would check in on what percentage of the category I'm reaching, and ideally, how much am I reaching relative to my competition, which is share of voice. So I do think it starts by using data to understand who really is a category buyer, how many of them there are, and then tracking how many you're reaching over time. But it does come back to some pretty old school metrics like reach and frequency, which have been much derided over the past 10 years. But reach and frequency is what's built pretty much every brand you've ever heard of in your life. And there's no reason to think technology has changed the sort of like fundamental nature of how advertising works. You need to reach people to influence people. Like reach is step number one. It's a sequencing issue. You can't influence someone if you don't reach them. So I would really focus on understanding the size of the audience and then figuring out how many you're reaching every single quarter.
I'll add one quick thing there, Ty, just to deal with the very specific question about making sure I'm getting in front of decision makers. Yep. A big mistake that everybody makes is they only target senior people. So that reduces your reach. It also raises your costs. But also, you got to remember something, that it's often the junior people that do the research. So for example, I used to work at General Electric before I joined LinkedIn, and I was in the marketing department. And a lot of times I was a junior person in the department, but I did a lot of the research. And I said, hey, boss, let's look at company 1, 2, and 3. So if companies 1, 2, and 3 didn't reach me, the junior person, they actually never got into the conversation with the senior person. So we think that when we target the senior people, that's the right strategy. But frankly, you want to target the junior person and the junior person so they read it, and then the senior person so that when the junior person comes in and says, hey, company A, the senior person says, yeah, I've heard of company A. So you actually want to be broader in your targeting, consider junior people and senior people related to broader reach, cheaper cost, and frankly, it's more effective in, I would argue, navigating the buying committee. And these decisions are made in committees. They're not made by individuals.
Yes, absolutely. Thinking about junior, senior, thinking about audiences over time. Speaking of time, squeezing in one last question. Somebody said, how long does this take? And I think the answer is it depends. So it depends on industry, depends on the vertical, depends on competition. So there are a number of factors as to how long it will take for the tool and for you to learn, what's actually working. So factor that in as you go about it, and just remember you don't have to do everything all at once, right? So you can start with low hanging fruit in terms of what we covered today, and go from there. So with that, we are short on time. We wish we could stay with you forever, but we cannot, sadly. So let's wrap it up for today. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending our event today. Just want to cover a few things as we wrap up. Please take our survey and let us know how today was for you. We definitely want to continue to deliver value there. So in the previous Evolve by LinkedIn, we talked about strategies to help your business. So with Amber Naslund and leaders from Accenture, welcome to New York. Got sirens in the background, folks. So it's the business approach with Amber, and also learning about how to invest in your thought leadership. Today, we talked about how to invest in your brand. So in that second installation. And then we have another event coming up soon. Join us for the next Evolve by LinkedIn on October 15th. We have Doug Weaver, founder and CEO of Upstream. He's going to be talking about how you can invest in yourself and invest in your sales and marketing. So definitely join that. Check it out. Evolve by LinkedIn.splashthat.com for a replay. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you spending time with us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Evolve by LinkedIn on October 15th. Thanks, everyone.